The repair shop was dim, the hum of fluorescent lights mingling with the occasional hiss of Freon. I'd been called in to check the unit in the back office of the boutique hotel where she worked. Not that I had any business being here. Her stepsister's boyfriend had never invited me anywhere. Yet somehow, here I was, standing in the doorway with a toolbox in hand, trying to convince myself that I was only here for the work. She was leaning against the reception counter when I walked in, one hand tracing the edge absent-mindedly, the other holding a mug of coffee that was already lukewarm. Her presence filled the room, even though she wasn't making any grand gestures. There was something about the way she tilted her head when she noticed me, the faintest curve of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if she was thinking something I wasn't supposed to know. "Finally," she said, voice soft but with an edge that suggested patience and irritation in equal measure. "This thing's been out for hours." I smiled, trying to keep my tone casual, even though my stomach had turned into a tight knot. "Yeah, I had a long morning. Shouldn't take long to fix." She nodded once, then studied me quietly, like she was weighing whether I belonged in this little slice of her world. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity or something else entirely, but the air between us felt charged in a way that made my skin prickle. While I worked, she hovered nearby, never intruding, never retreating either. There was a careful balance in the way she moved, each gesture measured yet effortless. When I bent down to check the wiring, her hand brushed against the counter, too close to me, and I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with electricity. I caught her glance, and for a moment, we held it. No words were needed, just the shared understanding that neither of us would acknowledge aloud. This was a spark. I tried to focus on the technical side of things, but my hands felt heavier than usual, fumbling with screws and wires. She leaned closer under the pretense of looking at the thermostat, and I noticed the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm, slightly floral, lingering in the air, and it made my throat dry. "You always get called to fix things?" she asked, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "More often than I'd like," I replied. The words sounded clumsy, but it was the best I could do. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh, but instead, I just watched the way her eyes caught the fluorescent light, and it made the world shrink around us. There was a pause, an awkward silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was magnetic. She tilted her head again, and I imagined all the things she might be thinking but wouldn't say. I realized then that I had been staring too long and quickly turned my attention back to the repair. Yet even as I worked, I could feel her gaze lingering, and I hated that I couldn't look away either. Finally, she straightened, lifted her coffee, and took a slow sip, giving me the tiniest smile. "Thanks for coming," she said. The ellipsis hung between us, loaded and unspoken. It wasn't a thank you for fixing the air conditioner. It was something else entirely. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That glance, that brief, almost imperceptible smile, stayed with me long after I left the room. I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind, over and over, like a secret melody I didn't want to forget. And the truth was, I had no idea what it meant. But I knew. Somehow, I wanted to find out. The next time I saw her, it was in the hotel's back office again, though the reason felt less technical and more arbitrary. The new air conditioning unit had arrived, and I'd been asked to help install it, though the real reason I found myself here was the quiet pull I couldn't resist. She was sitting at the small round table near the window, sorting through invoices, hair loosely pinned back, sleeves rolled up. Her expression was focused, almost severe, but there was a softness in the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before, or at least I hadn't noticed it. "Need a hand?" I asked, setting my toolbox down. She hesitated, just the slightest pause, before nodding. "If you don't mind." Her voice was clipped, polite, guarded. It wasn't dismissive, but it wasn't inviting either. Something about the way she spoke made me think she wasn't used to letting people in. As we worked, installing brackets and adjusting vents, I found myself watching the smaller details. How her hands moved with both precision and care, how her fingers sometimes lingered on the paperwork she'd abandoned, how her laugh, rare and unguarded, floated softly over the hum of machinery when she realized she'd misread a number. I caught her stretching, rubbing the back of her neck, and something about the slight slump of her shoulders made me wonder how often she carried other burdens, invisible to the world. I wanted to reach out, to offer something, anything, but the hesitation in her eyes made me hold back. "You've got strong hands," I said casually, trying to ease the tension, though my words sounded clumsy even to me. She glanced at me, startled, then laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "Is that a compliment?" "Maybe," I said, shrugging. My heart caught at the small smile she offered, fleeting but real. For a moment, we worked in silence, the kind that isn't uncomfortable but electric. The sunlight from the window hit her hair, just so, and I realized I could watch her for hours without noticing time passing. There was a vulnerability in her posture, a brief drop of the armor she usually carried, and I knew I shouldn't stare, but I couldn't look away. When the unit was finally mounted, she leaned against the counter, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. Her eyes met mine, and the briefest shiver passed through her body. It wasn't dramatic, but it was intimate, a silent acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, she felt it too. "I don't usually ask for help," she admitted, almost whispering, more to herself than to me. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded, aware of the quiet electricity in the space between us. My hand lingered on the wrench a second longer than necessary, and I noticed how her eyes softened as she studied me. Then she turned, reaching for her coffee, and our fingers brushed ever so slightly. It was almost nothing, but enough to send a small jolt up my arm. She didn't pull away immediately. She didn't smile, either. But the pause lingered, waited with possibility, and I realized I would replay that moment again and again, long after the work was done. The storm had been rolling in all evening, low clouds pressing against the city like they wanted in. I was helping her reorganize some old hotel records in the back office, a task that should have been mundane. But there was a strange energy in the air, the kind that makes you aware of every glance, every accidental brush of a hand. She was bent over a stack of papers, sleeves rolled up, hair escaping its pin in soft strands around her face. I knelt beside her to lift a box of files, and for a heartbeat, our shoulders brushed. I didn't move, though my body wanted to, and I caught her hand in the corner of my eye, noticing how she stiffened for a fraction of a second before relaxing again. "You're very thorough," I said, voice low, trying to sound casual, though my chest had tightened. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes met mine, and there was a flicker there, something unspoken, something we both knew but couldn't name. Her lips pressed together, almost like she was holding back words. "Maybe I just like things in order," she replied, finally, but the hesitation at the end made it sound less like a fact and more like a confession she didn't dare voice. I wanted to say something, anything, to close that gap. My fingers itched to reach out, to brush hers or tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, but I stayed still. I stayed because I knew that whatever this was, whatever was creeping between us, it wasn't supposed to happen. Not yet. Not like this. The sudden buzz of her phone on the desk cut through the tension like a knife. She glanced down, frowned, then picked it up. A name flashed across the screen. Her ex, probably checking in, probably thinking it was still his place to know her schedule. She hesitated, then silenced it without answering. A small gesture that somehow spoke volumes about boundaries, past and present. I wanted to say, "I'll protect this space for you," but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I adjusted the files I was holding, my hands shaking slightly even though I wasn't touching her. She sighed, a sound so soft I almost missed it. "I appreciate the help," she said, though her tone had layers, gratitude, caution, and something more complicated. The storm outside grew louder, rain pattering against the windows, the room smelling faintly of wet asphalt and paper. I realized how close we were, closer than either of us had intended, and how easy it would be to let the moment slip into something irreversible. My heart hammered, my mind raced with possibilities, and yet I forced myself to step back, just slightly, careful not to overreach. Our eyes met again, and for a second, I thought she might lean in. Her breath hitched, just slightly, and the air around us seemed to pulse with an unspoken question. But then the thunder cracked, startling us both, and she moved, just enough to break the proximity. Her hands were steady again on the papers, her posture professional, yet the faint flush on her cheeks betrayed her own awareness of the tension. I stayed frozen for a moment longer, watching her, knowing that the almost action, the almost whisper, the almost touch, was enough to haunt me. And as I left, carrying the last box of files, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we had come. The office was nearly empty that evening, the kind of quiet that made every tick of the wall clock feel amplified. Outside, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, flickering like they were uncertain about their own existence. She was sitting on the edge of the worn sofa in the back lounge, arms folded over her knees, and I didn't know whether to sit beside her or leave her be. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said suddenly, voice low, almost a whisper. I froze mid-step, unsure what she meant. The words weren't a question, but neither were they an answer. I sank onto the sofa across from her, careful to leave enough space, though every instinct in me screamed to close it. "About what?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my chest felt heavy. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let her gaze wander to the window, fingers tracing patterns on the fabric of the sofa. There was a pause, a long, stretching silence that pressed against my chest. Finally, she looked at me, eyes raw, searching. Us. I don't know what we're doing," she admitted. Her voice trembled ever so slightly, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. "I don't know if it's wrong, or inevitable, or both." The room seemed to shrink around me, charged with a tension I couldn't name. I wanted to speak, to tell her that I didn't have answers either, but any words felt too clumsy, too heavy. Instead, I watched her, memorizing the way her jaw tightened when she bit back what she wasn't saying, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders with each quiet breath. "I thought I could handle this," she continued, her hands loosening as if letting go of something too heavy to hold. "I thought I could just pretend it wasn't happening, that it was just circumstances. But it's not. It's everything, and I can't not feel it." Her vulnerability stunned me. The usual confidence, the effortless composure, had slipped just enough to show the real woman underneath, the one who was tired, conflicted, and painfully human. I wanted to reach out, to offer something steady, but I knew that touch wouldn't fix anything. Words wouldn't either. So I said nothing. I let the silence fill the room, thick and resonant, the kind of silence that carries more weight than any conversation could. Her eyes lingered on mine, searching for permission, for reassurance, for a way forward that didn't exist yet. And in that gaze, I realized something terrifying. We could no longer pretend that our dynamic was normal. It never had been. She leaned back, resting her head against the sofa cushion, and whispered, almost to herself, Maybe this is the mistake I've been waiting for my whole life." I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat, and I didn't move. Couldn't move. That line, so raw, so honest, echoed in my chest, and I knew I would carry it with me long after the lights went out and the city outside drifted into darkness. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to crack open the space between us, exposing something fragile and irrevocable. And for the first time, I understood that neither of us would ever be the same again. I found her in the hotel lounge that afternoon, curled up on the leather chair with a stack of old photographs spread across the table. The storm from yesterday had left the air heavy and still, carrying a faint scent of rain and dust. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt or quietly leave her to whatever memories held her captive. She looked up when I approached, eyes briefly startled, then softening. "I didn't expect anyone else here," she said, her voice even but fragile at the edges. I nodded, setting my toolbox down quietly. I wasn't planning on staying long. She gestured at the photos. They're just reminders," she murmured, flipping one over with delicate fingers. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands. Something about the way she handled them, the care, the hesitation, made me realize this wasn't just nostalgia. It was still raw. "Who is this?" I asked, picking up a photo of a man with kind eyes and a half-smile. Her gaze faltered, clouding for the first time since I'd met her. He was someone I thought I'd spend my life with. Then, life decided otherwise. She didn't elaborate. Her voice carried a quiet ache, an echo of heartbreak that didn't need words. I swallowed, feeling an unexpected weight in my chest. I wanted to say something that would make it better, but there was nothing I could offer except to witness it. "I'm sorry," I said softly, letting the words sit between us. She nodded, turning another photo in her hands. I've never really talked about it. Not to anyone. Not like this." Her lips pressed together, as if she'd almost revealed more than she intended. I realized then that her strength, the confidence I'd admired, wasn't armor. It was a carefully maintained shield. And in that moment, the shield slipped, just a fraction. "You don't have to explain," I said. My voice was quieter now, careful. I see it." Her eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something I couldn't name: gratitude, relief, perhaps even fear. "Most people don't," she admitted, her tone fragile but honest. We stayed like that for a while, her fingers tracing the edges of the photos, mine brushing against the table as if to anchor myself. The air was still, heavy with things neither of us would speak aloud. I noticed the small signs of fatigue in her posture, the faint shadows under her eyes, and the subtle twitch of her fingers that betrayed nerves she wouldn't voice. Then she handed me a small envelope, yellowed and creased, her hands lingering over mine just long enough to send a shock through me. "I found this, and I don't know why, but I think you should see it." I took it carefully, as if handling glass. My eyes met hers, and I could tell she had no idea what the effect of that gesture would be, or maybe she did, and that was what made it more terrifying. The envelope was unassuming, but the weight of it, the past she'd just revealed, the quiet trust she'd extended, pressed into me. And in that moment, with her watching, fragile and alive, I realized that everything had shifted. Just a little, imperceptibly, but irrevocably. I found her again in the hotel's empty lounge that evening, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and distant streetlights. She was sitting cross-legged on the sofa, a notebook open in her lap, though her pen hovered without writing. I hesitated, standing in the doorway, but she looked up and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an invitation without words, and I walked over slowly, carrying nothing but the steady rhythm of my own thoughts. We didn't speak at first. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was familiar, intimate even. I noticed the way her fingers traced the edge of the notebook, how her shoulders softened when she realized I wasn't intruding, the faint warmth radiating from her proximity. "You didn't have to come back," she finally said, voice low, almost teasing but with a vulnerability I couldn't ignore. "I didn't want to leave," I admitted, settling into the chair across from her, careful not to close the space entirely, though every instinct made me lean a little closer. Her gaze met mine, and for a moment, we let ourselves just exist in the same space. No explanations, no confessions, no demands. The weight of the past weeks, the stolen glances, the silent acknowledgments of longing, it all seemed to compress into this one moment of quiet understanding. "I've been thinking," she murmured after a pause, "about us. About how much space we've been giving these feelings. Maybe it's time to stop pretending it's not real." I didn't answer with words. I just reached out, letting my fingers brush against hers as they rested on the notebook. It was a fleeting touch, almost accidental, but it carried all the gravity we hadn't dared speak aloud. Her eyes softened, the faintest catch of a smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Neither do I said, matching her honesty. My hand lingered over hers, neither pressing nor pulling away, just staying. That touch alone felt like a promise, not a declaration, not a binding, just acknowledgement that we existed for each other in this moment. The room was quiet, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only other sound. She leaned back slightly, and I mirrored her motion, the distance between us still present, but infinitely smaller than it had been before. We didn't need to say anything more. The silence said enough. We had survived awkwardness, hesitation, and near misses. We had acknowledged the truth without naming it, and somehow, that made it stronger, more real. Her hand twitched just enough that our fingers intertwined fully, subtle but deliberate. I caught my breath, not in shock, but in recognition. We had crossed the threshold quietly, gently, and the moment didn't need fireworks or grand gestures. We stayed like that for a while, just sitting, hands touching, breathing in the same rhythm. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to us, but inside, the quiet finality settled around us like a blanket. No confessions, no dramatic declarations. Just the inevitability of being exactly where we belonged, together, finally. Looking back now, I realize how small moments stacked into something neither of us expected. The way she let her guard slip just a fraction at a time. The way I held my breath waiting for signs she felt the same pull. I never imagined it could become real without a dramatic confession, a grand gesture, or a sudden revelation. It wasn't fireworks or loud declarations. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, and somehow that made it feel infinite. I think about the first time I noticed her laugh, soft and hesitant, yet so honest it cut through all my doubts. I remember the way her hands moved when she thought no one was watching, the careful strength in her posture, the warmth in her eyes that spoke of both resilience and longing. Those little pieces of her made me want to stay, not because of some storybook romance, but because being near her felt like finding a missing part of myself I didn't know was gone. And her, she changed too, though not in ways the world would notice. She learned to trust small, quiet gestures, to let someone in without fearing it would shatter her. I saw it in the way she lingered in the room when I arrived, in the pauses where our hands met, in the subtle softness that replaced her usual armor. Love, in that sense, wasn't dramatic. It was patience, observation, and the willingness to meet someone halfway, over and over. I learned that real connection doesn't need grandiose moments to matter. It grows in the silences, in the shared breaths, in the quiet acknowledgement that you don't need to explain everything to be understood. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the clearest sign of strength, and that intimacy can be gentle, earned, and slow burning. Some nights, I still catch myself replaying those early glances, the almost touch, the stormy evening in the back office, and I smile. Those were the sparks, the raw, unpolished edges of something human, flawed, and beautiful. And we got to keep that beauty, not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. We didn't need to rush. We didn't need to announce ourselves to the world. The quiet certainty between us, the way our fingers intertwined without words, the way our silences spoke louder than any confession, was enough. It still is. And now, when I think of her, it's not longing or confusion. It's calm. It's warmth. It's the recognition that something rare and true can exist quietly, without spectacle, and still leave a mark that changes you forever. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?